Welcome to the Consultancy Edge. I'm your host, Matt Hodkinson, and in today's episode, I speak with Dom Moorhouse. Now, get ready for the resume to end all resumes. Of course, Dom founded and grew Moorhouse to a £20 million valuation. He's a former Royal Marine. He has 2 degrees in computing science and politics, philosophy and economics. He's a chartered director and a fellow of both the Institute of Management Consultancy and the Association of Project Management. He's a bit of an adventurer as well, having been a paragliding pilot, a whitewater raft guide, an endurance canoeist, climber and expeditioner. He's the creator of the 5-year entrepreneur, method grid, and Strength in Depth, to name just a few. He's also an angel investor and a mentor to consultancies across the globe. An impressive resume. What did we discuss in our episode? Well, we talked about how Dom's experience in the military influenced his approach to consultancy, how his experience in big consultancy at Deloitte influenced his approach to starting and growing Moorhouse from scratch, and of course, how he manages to balance the work and the life side of things, especially when you factor in all of that adventuring that he does. It's a fascinating chat, and I really hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome to the Consultancy Edge, Dom Moorhouse.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me. I hear this is going to be bigger than Rogan in a few months, so keen to get on board early doors.
I'm going to need to bring the scotch with me and 3-hour sessions. Go deep. Love it. Yes, it's great to have you with us. Obviously, we've known each other for a while. We've done a lot of work together with the Consultancy Growth Network and the likes, and I know that you mentor a lot of consultancies. And of course, that comes from your start in the world of consultancy, and of course the big story, Moorhouse. And I know there'll be plenty of people that want to hear that story. So tell us about how it all came about, your journey in consulting.
No, sure. I mean, I'm sort of conscious of the fact it feels, fairly, well sort of voiced this story. But I guess in synopsis, I had a slightly kind of unusual, eclectic, kind of run into consulting. I was actually, I was a Royal Marines officer for my 20s, and when I left, I had a real sort of entrepreneurial itch, from somewhere. Luckily, I think I didn't go straight from the military into my own sort of venture. I kind of realized, it'd be good to make some mistakes on somebody else's payroll first. And, I joined Deloitte Consulting via I did a distance learning sort of MBA to, help with that transition. 4 years at Deloitte. And it also gave me some opportunity to kind of get a sense of where the market was really, what service would kind of land. Kept myself honest to that sort of ambition of setting up on my own, as a singleton initially. And Moorhouse was, very much a sort of a lazy marketing, kind of result. And yeah, I mean, with huge amounts of sort of good fortune and serendipity, which, is kind of always needed in life, I guess. But, built a sort of transformation, complex kind of programmatic service offer. And I think, and I'm sort of conscious that this sort of messaging has maybe been a little bit kind of misconstrued over years also, but went with a very deliberate sort of intent to at least have a value point in 5 years. So, I've jumped quite heavily on the sort of the 5-year kind of branding, I guess, but that wasn't, as I've emphasized a number of times since, it wasn't because we definitely were going to sell at that point. It was just that I wanted to have a business that had the optionality within 5 years, just knowing how brutally hard, building a business would be, really, that I had that sort of strategic kind of personal option. And, with, as I say, with a lot of good fortune and some incredible colleagues, primarily we built a fantastic business, fantastic rides, huge companionship on route, and actually slightly premature at that 5-year point, after a competitive exercise that had a few twists and turns, ended up selling it to BT, who were actually one of our clients in latter years as well. And I think it rarely so into an arrangement that was kind of a genuine win-win for both parties. we can potentially get into that in more detail, but that's the sort of long story, very shortly told.
And amazing to see that it still bears your name under the Explio group and continues to this day. And you picked up on the people side of things there. I know firsthand, because I've seen it, the stories, the success that has come from that recruitment. I mean, the people that you recruited in those early stages and ever since seem to have gone into their own ventures as well. They're very much taken a similar journey to you, perhaps done it on your payroll, and then got off and started their own ventures, the likes of Gate One, for example. I know. Talk to me about, I mean, obviously, it bears no saying really about the importance of people in the world of consultancy, but just how prevalent was it for you?
Massively so, and and I have to say, if I sort of reflect, the key reflection is just one of how privileged it was to work with some just extraordinary human beings. I'd often sort of take myself to one corner and look at the assembled kind of room and just think, how on earth have I got here to be the boss of this team? And there's probably a maxim there, isn't there? Always try and surround yourself with people frankly more talented than yourself. And no, we took that bit really super seriously. And again, a reflection is a super kind of positive. There's a real positive pride as to how many people went on to do their own fantastic entrepreneurial ventures. Well, too many names to put into that bucket really. And it's funny, it's only with I guess subsequent years that I've sort of almost kind of reverse systemized how we went about that. It just felt very organic and very natural at the time. I mean, I guess there was a lot that I learned from the military, almost by osmosis, if I'm honest, as to what kind of characters and traits we were seeking. And what it did have was a really strong sort of values-led culture that we took really seriously, and actually quite with edge, I guess. Some of it was a little bit quirky and unusual, and after a while, that behaviour, that culture was so embedded that it sort of self-refereed. If anybody, well, firstly, actually, I think it was so vibrant it put people off from joining, but that was kind of in some ways a positive. We stood for something, we were unusual. And when people then came in that weren't of that right kind of setting, it kind of self-refereed. I didn't really have to do anything as a boss. It just became became obvious that it wasn't a place for them, rightly or wrongly. I'm not sort of seeking to make any kind of point there really. It just was vibrant, and it really stood for something.
Yeah, I know that, for example, a lot of consultancies follow that EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system sort of methodology, and that at the heart of that is that core values idea. And I guess when you have ultimate clarity on what those values are, it's easier for the team to self-police, as you say, for that culture to kind of build itself. So, I mean, is that sort of something you would advocate that consultancies focus more on? Is really just honing in on what their values are, being true to themselves?
Yeah, as part of a sort of kind of an overarching kind of ethos, which is the fundamental point that, and at one level there's a danger of this just coming across as very trite and platitudinal, because everybody will say clearly that people are important and high performing teams are everything, but in this game, in professional services, they really are. That's the force multiplication that leaders can kind of engineer. And I think there's sort of foundation blocks before you kind of necessarily get to values, but that's the kind of the upper kind of part of this journey really. And again, the word culture will be used here. I used to slightly pause on using that word actually, but that's fundamentally what you're trying to build. And at the heart of that are values that are really genuinely kind of collectively sort of brought together, and you have a really unique opportunity when you're growing a sort of small firm to genuinely do that. I mean, some of the big guys, when they have these sort of values exercises, they're complete nonsense. There's an HR department that puts up a little poster on everybody, behind everybody's kind of a printing machine. But with a small firm, you genuinely can get a group of people together and say, now what are the kind of what's the composite set of 4 or 5 ideas that we really think we want to stand for. try and move off of the platitudinal kind of description and then really, really embed that in everything you do. And, that will always pay huge dividends down the line.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned how your own experiences in the military had influenced your recruitment policies. Perhaps you're bringing some of those skills over. I want to touch on your journey from Deloitte as well, because I know that a great many consultancy leaders have had that experience working for some of the big boys in the consulting space and before going off to start their own venture. And talk to us about, firstly, how was your approach with that? Did you feel like you'd learned a great deal from that experience that you wanted to replicate? Or was it perhaps the idea that you'd noticed a better way of doing things, that you almost wanted to rebel against the kind of the tried and tested approach? Which kind of approach was it for you?
No, great question. I mean, and again, slightly unique journey for myself, from a military into consulting, which I think, for people that have trod that path, there's a degree of sort of, rational insecurity in that, essentially I spent my first decade in a very non-commercial environment. And, what you have in your head, therefore, is, have I left this way too late? Am I just, this is massive Johnny come lately and I'm just going to, I'm just never going to catch up. So, I think for the first chunk of that time was a sense of just, quietly sort of observing the corner of the room, just, where do I sit in this new world? If I'm honest, I think very, very quickly got to a point of realizing, look, there's some outstanding people here, as always, it's a kind of normal distribution, but there's also some less quality folk. And actually the fact that I have a very, very distinct background is actually, from a client's perspective, helpful, because I could hear the same stories being told in consulting workshops, and it was a really blah blah piece. Whereas I could bring in a completely different environment. It was and it just, again, it's not better per se. It was just different. So then I have found well, actually there's a differentiation here that's quite helpful. Of course, then there's knowledge acquisition. New methodologies, IP. If I'm honest, I think probably if you've got a curious brain, 1 or 2 years in, you've kind of probably absorbed, vast majority of that relevant for your particular kind of area of interest. And then I think, for me, what it was really useful to do was to sort of give me some ideas as to what service offering I could present to the market in a far, far sharper way than, a big firm could. And the huge gain as well, which I think I probably only realized retrospectively, was that you were starting to build a network up of known upper quartile, potential future colleagues. Not that I ever genuinely proactively solicited. Any Deloitte lawyers are listening, hopefully long out of that restricted covenant. Genuinely didn't, but notwithstanding, that was your network of people that were chatting to you, and I think that was another key piece. And so when I set Moorhouse up, I did sort of I was scanning the horizon as to what boutique opportunities are there, and it was really, really clear. I mean, this is obviously going back a chunk of time, Matt. It was sort of Blair and Gordon Brown's sort of public change agenda. So the UK was kind of replete with transformation kind of opportunity, but. And I could see in the States at the time that boutique kind of really top, kind of upper decile sort of delivery of professional program management was becoming a thing in the States, and we tend to lag the US. That's always an interesting kind of strategy, kind of technique to just see what's going on in the States. And I realized that I was in a practice area in Deloitte that focused on program leadership. And there was some very, very good folk in that, to be fair, but we were still a bit kind of spread, and you're still in a big firm, you do a bit of that, and then you get pulled into another engagement over here that was of a slightly different kind of, flavor. And I just thought, no, there's room here for a firm that is genuinely right on this niche, genuinely backed up with professional development, with IP, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that I think that was probably the kind of, in the background, I had a kind of, within 5 years of leaving the military, I wanted to do my own thing. And, there were the little cues to say, no, the timing's right now, which was about 4 years into Deloitte, I jumped up.
Because reflecting on that early part of the journey, we have obviously a bunch of listeners, different kind of parts of the consultancy journey. What were some of those initial sort of hurdles, perhaps, that you had to account for? Were there any particular sort of hiccups as you're growing, you know, that sort of growing pains beyond the people, perhaps? What else did you encounter?
Well, I think a lot of them are, to do with people, again, people business. But I mean, I was sort of, again, there's always a bit of luck, isn't there? But my first engagement was Transport for London, which was a client actually with Deloitte, and I actually, went to my relevant Deloitte partner at the time. I really agonized about this, and I think this might be a relatively common scenario. I agonized about the, essentially, seek permission or, beg forgiveness kind of dilemma. Do I go up front and say, look, this looks like it, I may be been asked to do a piece of work, in an incumbent client, and therefore, some contractual issues. And essentially I decided I would seek permission and got it, because I think the sort of, the logic of the Deloitte, kind of partner at the time was, well, better the devil we know, frankly, better that it's somebody that's a friend of the firm, Singleton Dom, than, another big four. Fast forward sort of 18 months, 2 years, I had a bigger account at Transport for London than I think Deloitte did. So that was a little jump to get through. But I remember probably a really key one early doors was that we delivered a fantastically, successful sort of first engagement, and it really was it was a privileged piece of work, generally, kind of strategic, and I think we did actually. There's another one there. If I come back a step, there's probably two stories quickly to share, Matt. One, because I think that that first year, 2 years is so kind of key, isn't it? But the first one was when I then got through the Deloitte permission, as it were, essentially agreed to take up this first piece of work. I kind of oversold a little bit, because it needed probably a team of 3 or 4 to deliver. And so the client took a big risk on me, because they said, look, Don, we're away, it's just you, but have you got a team of 3 or 4? And I was kind of, not a problem. We, of course I have. And I think, this is the classic sort of hustling of the early stage kind of professional services entrepreneur. And there's obviously, there's a kind of balancing act here, but, you're always in a slightly gray area of overselling. You have to be, and there's always that little overreach. But, my kind of implore is always just, you've got to go for it. You've got to take those risks. But then, of course, you get, your bluff gets called. Is that right? Execute. And I remember this one time with the, this early Transport for London experience, I had to have a team of 4. I think I got 3 through my, through the network. I just couldn't find this 4th person, and and it was, literally coming down to the sort of the point where I thought, I'm going to have to phone the client up and just explain that I've overreached. It was a bit of an oversell. And literally in that sort of precursor, 24 hours, an old Deloitte mate of mine who'd gone off traveling and left, just came back and essentially picked up the phone and casually said, Dom, I hear you set your own company up. Perchance might there be any roles for me? Just come back. I was like, oh, it's manna from heaven. So I think it's really interesting how sort of, fate can reward those that sort of do, take a bit of a leap into that chasm. And then the final story, just to sort of finish this kind of vignette, because it was the end of that engagement. And we delivered it literally to the day of the, the scope, and, the client was delighted. It was kind of award-winning kind of collaboration. But essentially said, can you guys extend for 3 months, because we feel we just need a bit more confidence build, of the team before you let it go. And we then, with quite sort of pious kind of values, said, look, you don't need us for free. You don't need us for another 3 months. You've got everything you need. We've trained the trainer. We've delivered your IP. You've got the methodology. It's just a confidence thing now. You guys have got to step into this arena yourselves. Went back to the ranch, which was like a tiny little flat office in London at the time, and 1 week turned into a month. Still no new work. Turned into sort of 8 weeks. What have we done? We've stood for something quite unique. We're integral to the values, but are we the most naive clients on the consultants on the planet? And then the phone rang, and it probably was sort of 7 or 8 weeks into this gap, and it was Bob Kiley, who at the time was the Commissioner for Transport for London, who had spoken to our client and just said, "Look, I've just heard this story about what you guys delivered, and it's been amazingly well received, and then you declined the extension." And Bob Kiley was this incredible American, he probably at the time was in his sort of 60s, he'd been around the block, and he just said, in all my kind of working life, I've never heard anything like it. They said, "I want you back in now, and you're doing another piece of work for me," which morphed into another kind of 1 year strategic piece of work. So I think there was some kind of early moments that we managed to make the right calls on. Just
That's incredible. I love that whole idea of, and I recognize overselling is something that consultancy leaders have to sort of wrangle with in the early stages. I know that you obviously advise and you mentor a lot of consultancy leaders and those in professional services as well. Would you advocate that risk taking? I mean, how do you reconcile as a consultancy leader when to take the risk, and where is the sort of biting point, do you think? Would you advocate that people do oversell consistently, or what would be your approach to that?
I think, there's obviously a real sort of balancing act here. It's not an oversell in so much as you're sort of you're describing kind of capabilities you just don't have, or you're going into complete sort of deluded kind of places. It's more the fact that when you get given an opportunity and you haven't potentially quite got all the jigsaw pieces now, that you don't sort of say no to it. You sort of say, "Yeah, I'm sure we can do that," and then you literally you just die trying to sort of build those jigsaw pieces. It's more that point. It's the kind of don't turn those gift horses down, because it feels like an untenable proposition to muster the resource and capability. And whatever you have, you might have a week, 2 weeks to sort of to sometimes permission to do that. I just found the number of times we did that, it was just incredible how Providence smiled on us eventually, albeit it would put us into, let's look under every rock and stone we can find to make this happen. That's more the point, really.
They said fortune favors the brave. I think that's where we're going with this, and I think we can learn a lot from the more product-based business, where of course the advice there is to sell before you create, to go and at least prove demand. And I think we forget that sometimes in the world of consultancy, that if you have the capabilities, as you say, it's not, from a proposition standpoint, it's not outside the realms of your knowledge, of your skill set or anything, but it might be just that scaling aspect and bringing the right people on board to help you with that sort of volume play. So I completely get that. And I guess I want to reflect on the success, of course, that Moorhouse had, during your tenure. I'll probably get the numbers wrong here, so you can correct me, but I understand it, reached a valuation of £20 million during that time. An amazing success story. For those that are looking to sort of replicate that sort of success, what strategies, what sort of journey did you put in place during that time, Dom? Because I know that, we'll come to the fact, I want to discuss the whole sort of 5-year entrepreneur side of things and everything, but what are your thoughts and strategies, behind that success?
Yeah, and what probably not a long form enough podcast to get into all of this, Matt, but I guess some of the fundamental tenets of it. Well, firstly, it was a very deliberate kind of business plan. Point number one, that was very open in that point about building the kind of the value option point, and it was very, very transparently shared. Everybody in my team had a copy of that business plan, and indeed, in the kind of refreshes, was everybody was involved in the kind of the resetting of that plan, I guess, is point one. And then some fundamental blocks within that. Well, first, it was a board set up very early doors with the right external advisors that could keep me honest, so I didn't end up, inverted commas, smoking my own dope, and B, just really, that real critical kind of, friend essentially was key. And then within the sort of, I guess, the fundamental way we executed on it, I mean, our shtick was clearly programmatic, project delivery. So, there was that kind of skill set we had within the firm. But I early doors was fascinated by where does value lie in a professional services firm. If you kind of really try and dissect that, where does it lie? And this is going back, obviously, when there was very little information about this. And, what's amazing now, we're both obviously involved in the consultancy growth network is, I'm so pleased now that there is so much more information and network and peer support in this regard. But back then, there was very, very little. I had to really search around the web to find anybody that had anything remotely sensible to say on this. Paul Collins, by the way, was my end result of that search, and I did, became that kind of critical friend. And I know many people know Paul. But then my sort of, I guess, my dissection of where does value lie led for me to create these sort of 10 areas of where I could hear, and felt that value lied. And against each of those 10, we called all of those 10 aspects, we called them multiple enhancers, because if you got them right, they would enhance the multiple that was essentially the multiplicative value of your firm. And so for each of those 10, we put a very, very small team on each. We call them, multiple enhancers was a bit of a mouthful, so ME teams. And, part of the progression then at Moorhouse was that you were involved in at least one, sometimes more than one, ME team. And actually that became part of the recruitment kind of play, because we'd say, look, join us because not only are you interested in working for some amazing clients, doing some really interesting work, but also you're fascinated by the topic of how to build, firms out. And some people aren't, Matt. For some people, it's like, I've got no interest in that. We'd say, that's fine, walk on, because there'll be plenty of firms that don't want you to do anything than just deliver to a client. We are very, very deliberately signaling the fact that this is an opportunity for you to do both. And so each of those teams, had, in the early days, obviously, a lot of double hatting, going on, but would have 2 or 3 people on, and in an annual year would have like 2 or 3 goals as to what we're doing that meaningfully progresses this capability. So I think, that and the final overlay, I would say, all things high performing team and the obsession we had with, building that culture, were at the heart of that trajectory. Yeah.
Incredible. I guess it gives everybody, ownership in the direction of the business, and another dimension that goes beyond delivery, as you say. And I think most people that are in delivery would accept that they want to expand their horizons a lot of the time. I want to talk about what you've done since at Moorhouse, of course, Dom. And I know, as I've said, you're a mentor, you're an advisor, you're an angel investor. You've also started further ventures as well. I want to talk about Method Grid specifically. Talk to us about how Method Grid came about, and of course, how you're supporting businesses through that venture now.
No, thanks, Matt. I guess the story here. So, when I sold Moorhouse, there was an earn-out period. And at that point, I sort of came right out of the business. I kind of felt it was a difficult one to be sort of half in, half out. So, a fantastic group of people there behind, time for me to move on. I can't, if I'm honest, was sort of making it up from there on. But initially, I wrote some guides on, how to build essentially value in a professional services firm. Led to me running some training, led to me becoming a non-exec chair on multi businesses. And I guess I did that for another chapter. And over that kind of period of time, again, privilege of being involved in, many, companies, and, probably spoke to, close to 100 sort of business leads in our sort of world. And it gave me some really, really fascinating insights, the ability just to sort of, look across that landscape, as it were. And the one point that really came out at me was IP, investment in intellectual property. And again, you've heard me talk about this before. I sort of actually, back to the kind of the growth of Moorhouse, we made huge investments in building out very demonstrably differentiated kind of method and toolbox that we would, very happily want to get into the sort of the sales conversation to emphasize how differentiated we were. So, spoke to all of these, folk, and what is universally the case is you're dealing with very smart, bright people, I think almost without exception. And so everybody understands that intellectual point, that IP method is key to differentiation and scale, is at the heart of the scale engine. However, hardly anybody gets beyond the badly organized SharePoint and plethora of slides as the response. And I thought that was just super fascinating at this junction. And I said that was essentially the kind of the genesis of Method Grid, which, look, if there are leaders out there, and it's not everybody, it's probably only the kind of upper quartile that really get it and really want to do something different. Technology at that point, platforms at that point can, help. Technology is never the panacea per se, but, if you have a sort of a holistic, leadership intent to be better at it, technology is key as certainly one of the enablers. So that was the genesis of Method Grid. And if I'm honest, Matt, it was a kind of initially an intellectual curiosity. Spent most of my working career at this point, obviously building professional services firms, advising, and I was like, I had known nothing about the product SaaS, type model. I'm just intellectually intrigued. And if I'm honest, I was lucky. It didn't have the same kind of imperative to feed my family at this point. It was more of a professional curiosity, and it kind of, as these things do, it just evolved. You went from public beta, private beta, public beta. Got some great signals to say, right, we should set this out. But again, like most early stage tech SaaS businesses, it's evolving, it's pivoting. Initially, I think our focus was in the professional services world. I know that space well, really, and there was certainly a use case there. I think we've gradually kind of positioned it into a larger enterprise kind of play. So it's gone from professional services, still a market, but not our focus, to the sort of AEC sector, where there's huge kind of there's huge implications for doing a job right by lots of regulation. The more sort of structured the operating backdrop is, the more relevant, very systematic IP is.
Yeah.
So the engineering consultancy is a classic sort of sweet spot for us, and then that's evolved into large UK public Guardian public program management offices, the network rails of this world. So Network Rail, we use it now to distribute their kind of methodology for delivering a project on the rail network for all of their supply base as well, and then latterly into sort of energy and renewables space.
Incredible.
So yeah, kind of it's on a journey. I'm actually the chair now. It's led by a far more talented individual, guy called Pip Morpeth, but I'm still kind of contributing to are we still pointing in the right direction.
Amazing. And Dom, we're seeing the growth of productisation in consultancy as well, and a lot of businesses supplementing their advisory side of things with technology. Where have you seen that work? And I know it can become a distraction and actually be to the detriment of the success of businesses if it's not done right. How are you advising some of your sort of mentees and some of the companies that you advise on how to productize, how to introduce technology to perhaps complement what they're doing?
Yeah, I think this is a massive question and a really kind of opposite one, Matt, as well, in terms of where we are now. And I really do not have all the answers, but I think there is something very, very interesting starting to kind of unfold. Essentially, I think we're just at the start of the blurring of the lines with the sort of, the tech business and the sort of PS business. Now, what I would have said hitherto, I think, is a number of key things that you've got to be clear about what you are. And, the trap is the sort of symmetrical one of where you're half tech business, half a PS business, and you're not good at either, and you just you become a bit of mush in the middle. And again, sort of it's only in latter year where I've really seen this, is that they are very, very different firms to organize. I mean, not least because the product business is invariably far more complicated. There are many, many more sort of capabilities, skills that you're trying to sort of combine, even in a fairly esoteric PS business, or definitely so. What I would have said is, for a PS business, if you kind of get into tech and product, which is a very sensible investment because it's a piece of differentiating IP, and maybe less so for a recurring revenue perspective, always good obviously to build that out and you kind of forward pipeline, but more from a differentiation point, or gives you permission to kind of maintain a kind of strategic conversation with a client. It's probably more about that. I think what's super interesting though now is that I think with the AI era that's unfolding, a lot of consultancy is going to be involved in helping end clients grapple with how they, work their way through the AI opportunity. Because you talk about the sort of it was the economist, Schumpeter's, creative destruction. I think I think we're about to see something of huge creative destruction with AI. You're either going to excel or you're going to die, in the next 5 to 10 years. And so there's a role for consultancies to help clients with that. But I think the professional service firms that are going to do well there really do need to have genuine tech differentiation, genuine tech talent in their teams. And I think, let's be honest, there's a lot of firms that have got very smart generalists in, and they can talk to a new topic quite quickly. But if you don't have genuine sort of, something in your toolbox that is kind of, evidence in that how to build tech, to design, build, test, roll out, you're going to be overtaken by the firms that do, or particularly the tech firms that are sort of coming down into more of a PS play. So yeah, it's going to get all very blurry, Matt, I think, in summary.
Yeah, amazing. I think we're starting to talk about some of those sort of future trends. We talked about AI a lot on the Consultancy Edge up to this point. But I want to touch on what else do you see are the opportunities for consultancy leaders going forward? We've talked about the sort of tech side of things, perhaps. Are there any particular trends, challenges perhaps on the horizon that you think consultancy leaders need to be aware of?
I mean, just to build a little bit more on the AI, because it's clearly so dominant in that conversation, is the, sort of, I heard reference the other day to, even the Microsoft CEO talking about his kind of view on it. And I can absolutely see this, is that essentially the AI agent is essentially going to replace the sort of, the application down the line. And effectively, all of that sort of, what do you call it, the CRUD database, essentially, which is 90% of kind of software out there, effectively smart UI, business logic layered onto databases, could essentially all kind of compress into an AI agent. And so, if you take that even semi-seriously, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen quite quickly, all of these firms are essentially going to replace their tech stack fundamentally, and let's just say you get a good way down that journey in 5 or 10 years. The opportunity for consultancy firms is to help, complex, behemoth, big organizations to try and optimally go through the, for that journey. So just to repeat that one. I mean, I think that's such a sort of dominant challenge point that others are relatively kind of secondary, Matt, by comparison, because I think the rest are largely ones that have been around, forever and a day, really, all the kind of standard kind of challenges of building out a, consultancy firm that we know.
It feels like the learning curve has really steepened, and actually that's as much an opportunity for the right position consultancies.
I think, well, and actually, into your kind of, your specialism, Matt, that you deliver brilliantly. That I think it is definitely the case. There is more competition. I think it definitely, kind of empirically you can evidence that, but you can almost feel it as well. Speaking to members of the Consultancy Growth Network, that I think there's a real place for boutiques. I think they're really, we should continue to be quite sort of confident in that regard. But you've got to increasingly sort of go to that point of narrow, discomfort in terms of the sort of differentiation point you have. And yeah, so that's both an opportunity and a challenge.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit, Dom. I know that you're a bit of an adventurer, a bit of an action man. I hear that you've obviously you do a lot of CrossFit stuff. I know that you're involved in something called what is it, Strength in Depth, and of course you've been a climber, a paragliding pilot, whitewater rafting guide, endurance canoeist as well. I mean, I'm a big fan of, obviously, health is wealth when it comes to business. I think we have to really, I think, champion the idea that fitness, both personally and professionally, is massively important and should be more of a priority. I speak to a lot of consultancy leaders who seem to be really stuck in the grind and find it difficult to find the time for that kind of stuff. How have you found the balance, and how have you prioritized that in your life?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes badly. That'll be the answer to that. But do you know, it's actually give me pause for reflection, and I somewhat randomly got asked to talk at a TEDx about 5 or 6 years ago to essentially a sixth form that had organised the TEDx, and it was on the topic of um, essentially how to make the most of your career and work, which is obviously an enormous topic to try and unpack in 18 minutes. But I spent a lot of that also talking about the, this balance point. Again, arguably a little bit cliche, but an important point. And I mean, I did a couple of things actually that have really helped me at least survive. If not, I'm not going to hold myself up as the exemplar in any way. But when I left the military, I sort of put down a kind of what I want to achieve in the next 10 years, and actually broke that conversation down into eight points. So it was, and one of those was career and profession. Within that bucket was I want to set my own firm up within 5 years, and this is probably what I do. But the really important point was it was holistic. It was kind of, where do I want to be with family and friends? Where do I want to be with my fitness? I have a big thing. People that know me know is that one of my maxims in life is whoever has the most stories wins. So you've got to get out there and what's it all about? Experiences with your family and friends and people you love. So what are you doing to fill your bucket up of stories and experiences? What are you doing maybe to support your community? Finances, etc. So I think it's really important to have that kind of holistic life will. It's not my device. There's plenty of those out there. Genuinely sort of set some kind of goals against each, and that's, if I'm honest, what's helped me kind of maintain perspective on where does work fit within that. Because again, Matt, you know a number of people. You often see, I particularly saw this when I was sort of advising and chairing on boards, that you go into a company boardroom and you'd look around the table and firms that are doing unbelievably well, absolutely kind of financial wealth, 10 out of 10, career success 10 out of 10. And then you'd go around the room and you're like, I know they're about to get divorced, mental health problems, unfit, buttons about to burst off the shirt, and it's such a false victory. So I think, it's that point about genuinely setting that kind of holistic frame and putting critical friends around you that help you keep honest to it, because you get so myopic, don't you? And you get so locked down as that sort of leader entrepreneur, you kind of lose it. I certainly did. I needed good people to give me a bit of a shake every now and then.
Yeah, it's going to be. I love that idea of collecting those stories and being the most interesting person in the room that comes from that. I think if we just spend our time focused on business all the time, we're going to make for a very, very boring companion in any room. So I love that idea. Dom, we always, we're coming to the end. We'll always wrap things up on the consultancy edge with our snog, marry, avoid. Of course, the snog is a quick win. What would you implement in your consultancy if you were, operating today? So let's start off with that. What would be a quick win that you would advocate people to jump on board with?
Maybe two here, Matt. A sort of a quick snog and a slightly longer snog, maybe. So the quick snog, I'm sure this is not going to be a new point. Is if you haven't already got it, a client feedback loop process. And I'm amazed how many firms do not have that honest calibration of did we deliver what we sort of set out to deliver. Really simple kind of balanced feedback kind of process that I would always advocate. Somebody that's completely independent of the delivery team, is coordinating. And if you haven't got that, you can put that in place overnight. And the slightly longer snog, but still pretty quick to do, is that point of getting a board in place early doors. It feels sometimes for an early stage entrepreneur, it might feel a little bit kind of above your station. It really isn't. It's just about giving you that independent sort of discipline of are we in the right strategic direction, and putting onto that board somebody that's really well matched and is going to genuinely speak truth to you as to whether you're on track.
Love that. The feedback loop side is so important. I've spoken to so many consultancies that don't really effectively measure the impact of what they've done as well. So not just about the experience that the client has had in working with you, but also what's the impact that they've felt from the work as well. Gather social proof, such an important thing. the marry side of things then, Dom, is something that you would advocate for the long term in business. What would that be?
Yeah, and I think at a meaningful level, not the superficial sort of soundbite, is that high performing team bit should be your obsession as the leader. Ultimately, it all comes down to execution of a strategy. You've clearly got to be differentiated. You've clearly got to have a sort of service that the market wants. But if you tick those sort of fairly fundamental boxes, do you have the kind of the team that's going to be recognised as exemplar in that world? And there's a lot in that, but fundamentally become professionally really kind of intrigued by that topic, unpack it. But a really sort of simple kind of piece would be, look, if you say your people are important and you're going to invest in them, that as a minimum every quarter, get your whole firm team together, particularly in this post-COVID world, in a co-located space, celebrate successes, wins, do some professional development, explain the strategy, talk about your next stage of, where you're going, enjoy each other's company, just as a minimum, once a quarter. And I'm still amazed how many firms find themselves too busy, all sorts of reasons why they're not doing that. So yeah, genuinely obsessed with how you go about meaningfully building a high performing team.
Amazing. And lastly then, Dom, what would you ditch? What would be the thing to avoid and get rid of as quickly as possible?
I think, this trails a much bigger topic, but, one that we, obviously talk about in the consultancy growth network a bit, Matt, is that, and I certainly made this mistake early doors with Moorhouse, was when you have a prospect meet with a potential new client and you go in with your massive PowerPoint slide deck and you cannot wait to show off and talk and explain everything you can to the kind of prospect about how amazing you are and the amazing clients you have, throw that deck away, just go in and SUAL, shut up and listen, actively listen, and only way into that conversation even start to give little bits about who you are, what you do. That's the key to business development, which is obviously key to scaling a professional services firm. So ditch the excited entry, big PowerPoint show off decks.
Yeah, excellent. Love that. Dom, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk at length with you. Thank you so much for being on the Consultancy Edge today.
No, thank you, Matt. And yeah, go get Rogan.
Will do.